The elections in the United States were meant to be about the swing states, the 7 battleground states that would decide who would carry the day. And the question that was being asked before counting started was whether the blue wall would hold. In fact, it turned out to be a red wall. I'll take you through how the swing states actually moved. All the crucial states which Team Harris was hoping to do well in and turn into a real fight actually went to Donald Trump. This is how these 7 swing states looked in 2016, then 2020, where Biden won all but North Carolina. And they were all firmly blue. Now just take a look at what happens in 2024, whether it's Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Georgia, Arizona, or Nevada. You've got Donald Trump winning by narrow margins for sure, but winning in all 7 of those crucial swing states. So the dice really rolling in favor of the Republican Party. Why did things happen this way? Joining us on this broadcast is Manga Anantamula, Republican Party leader, has been a candidate for the congressional seat. Joining us also is Calvin Bomo, distinguished fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. Ajay Jain Bhaturia is a Democrat Party leader. I want to go across to Manga Anantamula first. Congratulations for the way this turned out for your party, the Republicans. Is this beyond your expectations as well? All 7 swing states going in your favor, a 4% vote share gap, very different from what the pundits and the pollsters were predicting.
Congratulations to the entire population of Trump supporters around the world. Definitely this is our moment and a great victorious moment. And I'm not surprised at all that the swing states had pulled back. I knew it was going to be a landslide, and I have been predicting that this was going to be a landslide. And we do have a landslide. We have the House and we have the Senate, and we have President Trump with victoriously, I'm predicting 315 by the time, 314 by the time we are done with our counting today. So this is a great win for the Republican Party, and especially this could not have happened if it was but for Donald Trump, because he is the pulling force together to pull all these voters together for this great victory. I think President Trump did it, and he will do it going forward, keeping us
so
all
Donald
together.
Trump had some calculations. Kamala Harris had some calculations. On counting night, Harris's calculations came apart and Trump's calculations fell into place like magic. I'll give you a sense of how America voted, and then we'll talk to Colin Bowman at the American Enterprise Institute. If you look at different demographies, and I'll start with white men, amongst white men, a 20% lead in favor of Donald Trump, 59%, this is according to exit poll data from the United States, weighted to actual counting data. So it gives you a fairly accurate picture of how America voted. 39% of white men voting for Harris, 59% said they voted for Donald Trump. White men make up 34% of the total voters in the United States. Amongst white women, 52% of white women said they voted for Donald Trump, 47% saying they voted for Kamala Harris. This is where the Harris calculation went wrong, because the Democrats would have been hoping that amongst women, Harris would score big. Remember, white women make up 37% of America's total voters. So here she scored far lower than Kamala Harris would have hoped for, and Donald Trump having a 5% lead amongst white women as well. Let's now come to black men and take a look at voting percentages there. This is 5% of the total voters. Here, Kamala Harris has a massive advantage. 78% of the votes for Kamala Harris, 20% for Donald Trump. But remember, black men make up only 5% of America's population. From there, let's now move to the next category that we're looking at, which is black women, which is 7% of the registered voters. Here, a massive lead for Kamala Harris, 92% of black women voting for Harris, only 8% for Donald Trump. But there, if it's only 7% of the voters, so she's winning in the small groups, losing in the big groups, which is what complicates Kamala Harris's vote share graph. Let's now look at Latinos. This is where one of the big errors of judgment happened for the Harris campaign. They thought they had this community in the bag. But if you look at the end numbers, that doesn't seem to be the case. Amongst Hispanic and Latino men, which is about 6% of the voters, Donald Trump has a 54% vote share. Kamala Harris has only 44, a 10% gap here. Kamala Harris was hoping that this is where she would strike big. A lot of the effort made by the Democrats was concentrated in this vote group. I want to go across to Carlin Bowman now. You know, this happens in India, it happens everywhere. All camps, strategists, aides make calculations. It seems all the calculations that Donald Trump made, bringing young men out, getting those who have a lower propensity to vote to the polling booth, those worked. The calculations that the Harris campaign made, that the Latinos would vote for her in big numbers, that women would give her a big lead, that didn't come apart. Why did this happen in this fashion, according to you?
Trump's percentage among Latino voters was truly impressive. We haven't seen a number that big in a long time, though of course he still lost that overall vote. I think that you have many second and third generation Latino voters in the United States. Their views are not the same as new Latino voters. And in fact, they look pretty normal and look like a lot of other immigrant groups over time in the United States. So that was a very impressive margin for Trump, much better than I think anyone had expected among Latinos.
Syed Akbaruddin joins us. He's been India's former permanent representative to the United Nations. Thank you very much, Mr. Akbaruddin. Is it fair to say that Prime Minister Modi and this Indian government would much rather have to deal with Donald Trump than Kamala Harris? And while they may never say this publicly, and serving officers will certainly not say so, this is actually the better case scenario for them?
Well, Rahul, the Indian diplomatic establishment has history of navigating changes in administration. And this goes back to almost 20 years. And even in the last 3 years, there have been changes in administration that have been navigated successfully. And there's been a secular improvement in ties through every administration. So I wouldn't think that there was a concern in the Indian diplomatic establishment about who would be in office. Having said that, I think there are some factors which make the Trump administration perhaps more preferable to the Biden administration for the Indian diplomatic establishment. Number one, you mentioned that President Trump generally prefers a personalized form of diplomacy. And he has not made any, he's never held back saying that he has an admiration for the Indian Prime Minister Modi. He considers him a friend. He considers him to be a strong leader. And if this is the personalized form of diplomacy that the US administration in Trump too will engage in, it works well for India.
But
because
Trump is also more mercurial, more transactional, more unpredictable. So take us through what you foresee as being potential landmines that the Indian government will have to navigate through while dealing with this Trump presidency.
The potential landmines will always be there. And every time there's a change in administration, we will look at it. I remember thinking of this thing during the last change in administration. Even when Trump came, there was a certain unpredictability and uncertainty. So what could be the issues? So I would think that the US is a global power. So it engages globally and comes up with global decisions. And in an interdependent world, sometimes these global decisions can have an impact, whether intentionally or unintentionally, on many others. So if the US administration starts looking at changing certain issues, so for example, tariffs and trade globally, not only for India, but for all countries globally, it would have an impact on us. Let's also not forget that it was the Trump administration which withdrew India's GSP benefits during the last term. So the other side of this is that it's a transactional approach to diplomacy, and big countries like India have many leverages that they can transact. So I wouldn't think this as a challenge. Yes, it would be a issue of unpredictability, but it can be addressed given the leverages that both the US has with India and India has with the US. And And one last point I'd like to still make is that a Trump administration or a Republican administration generally tries to look at convergence of interests than congruence of values. Now, when Eastern and Western societies interact, they're bound to have these differences in perceptions in terms of values. The Trump administration perhaps is more focused on getting a congruence of interest than values, and that again works well for India with its most important partner, that is the US.
And he can also potentially have a better relationship for the United States with Russia, which would make it easier for India then to navigate with China, because if Russia is not as pro-China and slightly less hostile towards the United States, that too works in India's advantage. I hope to talk about this with you in detail in the days to come as we track the global fallout of this Trump presidency. Syed Akbaruddin, thank you very much for joining us. I want to go across to Geeta Mohan, our foreign affairs editor. She's at Palm Beach in Florida, which is where we saw the most happening party, not just in the United States, but anywhere, where President Trump came out to announce that he had won. Geeta Mohan was amongst the lucky people who were there, witnessing history right in front of our eyes. Describe the mood. Must have been completely electric. What an experience for you, Geeta.
Well, absolutely. The day started with Republicans being confident yet nervous, because they all came with that experience of the last elections, and they kept saying that there could be a possibility that this election would also be stolen. And so there was a lot of apprehension. There were women, men who were saying they're jittery, they're nervous. And slowly, as the evening passed by, Rahul, there was more confidence. They started realizing that the numbers have started coming in. Then they started getting into the detail of how many percentage of votes have been counted. And then again, only being confident once it crossed the 50-60% mark. And the moment when things changed, and it was absolutely celebratory, was when Kamala Harris's campaign manager stepped out in DC and said she is not going to address the public today, and it's going to be done tomorrow. This is what he had said yesterday. So she was not going to concede. But she was also, it was very clear that the Kamala camp knew they were in trouble, and there was jubilation in that room. India Today was the only Indian channel to be present there, Rahul. So it was an ecstatic mood and fever when it comes to how people were reacting. And then came the two big states. Pennsylvania was called, to which there was no end to the kind of jubilation we saw in the room. And then they needed just 3 more seats. Wisconsin was called, and they hit 277, way past the 272 mark. And then the rest, as we can say now, is history. History unfolded right in front of us in that room at the Palm Beach County Convention Center. It was beautiful to see how all of them came together. There were emotional scenes as well. There were some women who actually were weeping out of joy, not out of sorrow, for sure. And then they all very intently stood there listening to President-elect Donald Trump. So it was an experience in itself.
And I'm glad that you could capture that for our viewers. Geeta Mohan, thank you for joining us. We'll keep coming back to you for more. Behind Donald Trump's historic win is his unique team, the MAGWENGERS. The MAGA Avengers, who championed his cause and helped secure his place as the 47th President of the United States. Let's take a look at Team Trump.
Donald Trump is back in the White House after securing a historic second term. A victory made possible by a team of political strategists. The leading lady in Team Trump is his camera-shy senior campaign advisor, Susie Wiles, who oversaw operations and strategy, especially in battleground states, who did not address the victory rally despite being prodded by Trump himself. Another key member in the team who hogged headlines but was missing from the victory podium was the world's richest man and biggest Trump backer, Elon Musk. The Tesla CEO, who also owns social media giant X, aggressively campaigned for the Republican candidate.
there's a lot of people out there who need to vote for President Trump. Okay, so this is a real battle. This is a real election battle. So you need to get friends and family to vote. Make sure they vote early. This is important. We're going to be putting up a scorecard, okay? An early vote scorecard, state by state, county by county.
Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who suspended his independent presidential bid in support of Trump, is likely to get a job in the new administration.
A few names like Robert F. Kennedy Jr., he came out. And he's going to help make America healthy again. And now he's a great guy, and he really means it. He wants to do some things, and we're going to let him go to it. I just said, but, Bobby, leave the oil to me. We have more liquid gold, oil and gas. We have more liquid gold than any country in the world, more than Saudi Arabia. We have more than Russia. Bobby, stay away from the liquid gold. Other than that, go have a good time, Bobby. We're going to be paying down debt. We're going to be reducing taxes. We can do things that nobody else can do. Nobody else is going to be able to do it. China doesn't have what we have. Nobody has what we have. But we have the greatest people also. Maybe that's the most important thing.
U.S. Congressmen Byron Donalds and Brian Jack had called Trump the right candidate to make America great again. Dana White, the CEO of Ultimate Fighting Championship, vociferously endorsed Trump throughout the latter's campaign and called him the most resilient man he has ever met.
This is what happens when the machine comes after you. What you've seen over the last several years, this is what it looks like. Couldn't stop him. He keeps going forward. He doesn't quit. He's the most resilient, hard-working man I've ever met in my life. His family are incredible people. This is karma, ladies and gentlemen. He deserves this. They deserve it as a family.
Last but not the least, the unofficial advisor of Donald Trump, his son Barron. Barron, who takes an interest in politics, advised Trump on how to attract Gen Z to polling booths and was the brains behind his father going live with popular streamers.
I just want to thank her, but I want to thank my whole family, my amazing children, and they are amazing children. Now, we all think our children are amazing. Everybody here thinks their children are amazing, but that's a good thing when you think they are. But Don, Eric, Ivanka, Tiffany, Barron, Laura, Jared, Kimberly, Michael, thank you all. What a help. What a great.
Trump's advisors had a tough task on their hands, but in the end, they managed a relatively easy victory for their leader. The campaign, as it turned out, was a job well done by Team Trump. Bureau Report, India Today.
So it's not just the presidential race. The Republicans have the advantage in the Senate and the U.S. Congress as well. This is the first time after the U.S. Supreme Court said pretty much that whatever the president decides is final and you can't really question or challenge it. Take you through how the new Senate looks like. These numbers could change just a bit, but at this moment, of the 100 Senate seats, the Republicans have 52, the Democrats 42, so a 10-seat lead for the Republicans. They've crossed the 51 mark, which is where the majority figure lies. If we look at the U.S. Congress, there's some seats which are still to be called, but of the 435 U.S. Congress seats, the majority figure is 218. The Republicans already at 198, Democrats at 180 with 57 seats still to be called. Again, the Republicans seem headed very close to the majority mark. So, Karen Bowman, the fact that Donald Trump is as powerful as any American president could ever hope to be, he'll have control of the Senate, likely to have control of the Congress as well, and with the Supreme Court order which says you can't really question what he says. This man is like a Maharaja, a Shahenshah. He's as powerful can be.
He certainly is going to be very powerful, but what will ultimately matter is performance. Mm-hmm. And we know he has a very broad, very big agenda. We'll have to see how that works out. We know that Americans were most concerned about their financial worries If you look at the polling numbers, people were more pessimistic in 2024 than they were in 2008 during the Great Recession about their own financial well-being. So I think the economy, immigration are going to be topics that he needs to address very early on, but performance ultimately will matter.
Ajay Jain Bhaturia joins us, is a leader of the Democrat Party. Mr. Bhaturia, where did the Trump campaign get things so horribly wrong? It's almost as if there was a big surge of Trump support building right underneath your noses. Your strategists, your pollsters, your pundits completely failed to pick it up.
First of all, congratulations to President-elect Trump. I think the American people have clearly spoken in that they want Trump. They have chosen Trump to handle the economy, the immigration, the crime, and everything else. So they've clearly spoken, and I think the transition from President Biden to Kamala Harris, which was done without an election, I think that was one of the points which, when I was knocking doors in Pennsylvania, a lot of voters asked me that you talk about saving the democracy, but you have not elected your nominee through a democratic process. So how can we trust you on saving the democracy? And then there were the ethnic groups, like large percentage of Indian Americans who felt that Trump will be better for India-US relationship. There were Muslim Americans, there were Arab Americans, and all these different coalition people. They had been seeing Trump to end the wars in the Middle East and Israel and Ukraine wars and stuff, and they felt that he's better on economy and immigration. So I think that's why they have given him a strong majority.
Okay, Ajay Bhaturia, Manga Anantamula, Colin Bowman, thank you very much for joining us. I want to go across now to Ravi Agarwal. He is the editor of Foreign Policy magazine, one of the most well-regarded journals on foreign policy globally. So thank you very much, Ravi, for joining us. How did the pollsters and the pundits get it wrong a third time over? They failed to predict the Donald Trump victory in 2016. Then they said, okay, we've started adding weights. We now account for voters who vote Trump but may not be willing to say so publicly. And yet they seem to have made the same mistake. Is this just liberal media bias at play?
Well, the pollsters are going to say, Rahul, that they didn't quite get it wrong, that the way probability and predictions work, in the last few days, they were saying there's roughly an even chance of either candidate winning. So, of course, when you say that and one of the candidates wins, you're allowed to spin it and say, well, half of our projections suggested that was the case. I think your point about underweighting Trump support is a problem that pollsters have faced ever since Trump emerged. Let's face it, he is a unique political phenomenon. He's very different from anything American history has had before. His supporters are less likely to pick up the phone. During the pandemic, his supporters were less likely to be at home. In fact, Biden's supporters were much more likely to be cooped up at home, wearing their masks, answering phones, and diligently responding to surveys and polls. So there are a whole set of reasons, I think, that pollsters are going to try and explore and understand and analyze. I'm not quite ready to, just point the finger at them. This is challenging. And you will know this from India as well, Rahul. Very difficult to predict outcomes in messy, big, large democracies.
Sure. What do you expect internally within the United States from this Trump presidency? How is it likely to be different from what we saw from 2016 to 2020?
So there are several things here. I think Trump this time is much more aware of what the presidency means. I think in as much as he will put in place people who are loyalists, yes men even, he's much more likely to have a clearer sense of what he wants to achieve and how to get there. We've all heard about the policies he wants to put in place, whether it is heightened tariffs on every country on earth, especially China, whether it is being more transactional in relationships with various countries. All of that, I think there are constraints. We still don't know how the House has turned out. We also don't know, if he has, enough of a filibuster, for example, to push through, unilaterally things that he wants to do. So it's not like there are no constraints, but we are entering an era, I think, where the presidency and one party is much stronger than it's ever been, and they have an agenda. The question is whether they will go too far with that agenda. And the question, I think, as well, is how prepared is the rest of the world to deal with all the things that they've been talking about with Trump for many years, particularly Europe, I think, which is deeply concerned about Trump's commitment to alliances, NATO, and Trump's willingness to keep helping Ukraine.
Women were expected to vote disproportionately in favor of Kamala Harris. The data suggests amongst white women, Donald Trump has a 5-point advantage for 52 versus 47. Amongst black women, which is a far smaller percentage of the American population, Kamala Harris leads by a big percentage. But amongst 37% of the voters, which is white women, you've got Trump leading. What explains Kamala Harris not being able to pull white women away from Donald Trump?
So I should caution here, a lot of this exit poll data could change over time. But from what we know so far, all of the data you're citing is what we have. Several things. I think on reproductive freedom and abortion, for example, which has been such a big issue in the 2022 midterms, for example, maybe it could be that voters felt that they could leave things to their states. So I think to truly understand their decision-making, you have to look down the ballot and see, what they did and exactly where they voted from, and how that moved the needle for them. But I think more broadly, in any electoral result, it's really important to look at it with humility. And, ultimately the people get what they want, right? And so it's going to be very important for Democrats and for Harris and whoever, the Democratic Party is going to have to remake itself after this, despite pulling together the broadest coalition possible from AOC on the left to Cheney on the right. Despite that broad coalition, they're going to have to rethink, what do Americans want? Do Americans perceive that the Democratic Party looks down on them? And I think at a much deeper level, Rahul, and we can get into this, do enough Americans feel that the system isn't serving them? I think one way to look at this vote is a real sense across this country that people feel that the system just doesn't work for them. It's too hard to get on the housing market. It is too hard to send your kids to college. It is too hard to keep up with the Joneses. Inequality is really bad in the United States. And then lastly, I would say, Rahul, incumbency has hurt a number of leaders around the world, including in India, but in democracies across the globe in 2024, this has not been a good year to be in power and to approach elections. Some of that actually is because of the pandemic and stimulus plans after the pandemic, which has led to high inflation.
But the difference is that in India, the vote and seat tally just took a bit of a hit, but Prime Minister Modi still continues to be in power. Unlike the level of anti-incumbency we saw in the United States, where 3 out of 4 voters said they were very unhappy with the direction in which the world was going, with which America was going. Let's spend a moment on what to expect outside the United States. When it comes to India, do you think between Harris and Donald Trump, India's got the verdict they would have preferred?
I mean, I think Indians should feel very confident in the fact that there is broad bipartisan agreement in Washington, in the United States, about the importance of the Indo-US relationship. We know this, from a previous Trump term, but also, from several presidents going back now to the 90s, I would say. The trajectory of this relationship is solid, is robust, is strong, and is strategic. It is not just based on the whims of one leader on either side. So I think the trajectory is good. Trump, however, is mercurial. He likes to look at every relationship in a zero-sum transactional way. What's in it for me is a question he often asks. Those of us who are, analysts like myself, we don't see the world that way. We think that, there is more to it than that. Economics isn't always about pure bilateral transactions. There are sort of larger global norms and rules that one has to think about when you think about relations with any one country, because it's part of a bigger picture. So on the one hand, I think India, of all the countries in the world, is in a better place in a Trump presidency than, for example, a European country. But I don't think India should be absolutely complacent. For Indians and policymakers in India watching this, it's very important to understand how to deal with Trump, how to understand that Trump is a transactional leader. And in any such sort of discussion with a transactional leader, you have to make clear what is in it for them. And I think that's how the Indian government knows how to do this, but they'll have to be very careful to adhere to that approach.
Let's spend a moment on the United States and China. We're seeing already China trying to improve ties with India. Their calculation probably was that Trump is coming back to power, and before that, let's mend fences across the border, which seems to be a wise bet in hindsight. But if Trump increases trade tariffs with Beijing, and we saw what happened between 2016 and 20, how do you see the America versus China dynamic play out in a global context over the next 4 years?
So the tariffs, to explain to your viewers, could go up as high as 50% or even 60%. That's what Trump has said on the campaign trail. In reality, it's not that easy to make that happen. There are all kinds of legal maneuvers domestically in the United States that would make it very hard to pull that off.
But he now controls the Senate and possibly the Congress as well. And the Supreme Court says he can do whatever he wants and there's no bar on that.
Sure, but not on trade rules. That will be harder to pull off. And it takes time to pull it off. And there will actually be a lot of opposition. Remember, a whole range of economists have pointed out that that level of tariffs would eventually be ruinous on the American economy and would lead to inflation, the likes of which America hasn't seen in decades. I'm not saying it won't happen. I'm just saying it won't happen as quickly or as easily without opposition as one might imagine. But the Chinese are certainly going to be worried, but I think Americans are worried about it as well. I mean, a tariff basically means goods will instantly become more expensive for Americans and they'll have to turn to other countries. But Trump has also said he would put in place an immediate 10 to 20% tariff on every country. So watch out. I mean, that's going to be a massive roller coaster ride with China. The other two key differences between Trump and Biden or the Harris status quo is that Biden and Harris would have relied a lot more on alliances to try and constrain China's access to semiconductors, to constrain China's rise more broadly. That gets a little bit harder when you have a leader like Trump who is a bit more transactional, a bit more bilateral, rather than thinking in terms of bigger alliances. And then lastly, Taiwan. It is not entirely clear how much Trump is committed to defending Taiwan. He's said this in public. I mean, he could say, for example, what's in it for us? What are we getting out of defending Taiwan? Look at the trade relationship, look at the fact that they're making all the semiconductors, they stole our business. That's one way of looking at it. But the other is that if you look at the people that Trump might put in his national security cabinet, so in the Pentagon, National Security Advisor, State Department, all of the main candidates we're looking at have been very publicly confident that they want to make sure the United States defends Taiwan. So in the next few weeks and months, there's going to be a guessing game about how much power these individuals have, whether it's Mike Pompeo, whether it is Bridge Colby, whether it is Rick Grenell. All of these names that you will learn more about in the following days, their role is going to be critical here.
Ravi Agarwal, taking our time and joining us on a busy morning. Thank you very much. Appreciate this. See you soon.
Pleasure.